The long-awaited return to the brutal and visually stunning world first introduced in Apocalypto has finally begun to take shape with the early development of Apocalypto 2, a sequel that seeks to expand the historical, emotional, and cultural breadth of the original while plunging viewers even deeper into the clash of civilizations and the internal struggles of its characters. Set years after the climactic escape of Jaguar Paw and the arrival of Spanish conquistadors on the shores of the Yucatan, the sequel pivots away from the personal survival tale of a single man and evolves into a broader, more complex narrative that grapples with the aftershocks of colonization, the unraveling of ancient traditions, and the transformation of identity amidst cultural annihilation and rebirth. The sequel does not merely aim to replicate the intensity and physicality of the first film, but instead builds on it with greater philosophical depth, haunting historical resonance, and a tragic sense of inevitability as the characters are swept up in tides of change far beyond their control. Jaguar Paw, having survived the brutal trials that tested every ounce of his strength and resolve in the original film, returns as an older, more introspective figure. No longer just a hunter or protector, he has become a reluctant leader among the surviving members of his tribe, now displaced and scattered by disease, internal division, and the growing shadow of foreign invaders. The sequel paints a vivid picture of a fractured Maya world, where once great city-states lie in ruins, where myths have been shaken, and where new threats rise not just from without, but from within. Jaguar Paw carries the scars of his past, both visible and buried deep within, and is haunted by the ghosts of the men he killed, the family he lost, and the land that no longer feels like his. In contrast to the adrenaline-fueled survival tale of the first film, Apocalypto 2 explores his emotional trauma, his spiritual doubts, and the burden of trying to preserve something that may already be doomed. The sequel introduces a range of new characters that reflect the expanding scope of the narrative. One of the central figures is a young Spaniard named Mateo, the son of a conquistador, but born in the New World. Mateo straddles two worlds, raised with European customs and language, yet deeply curious and at times sympathetic to the native culture. His internal conflict becomes a key narrative thread as he finds himself questioning the brutality of his father's mission and the moral implications of conquest. His storyline intersects with that of Jaguar Paw when fate throws them into an uneasy alliance against a mutual enemy, a rogue band of mercenaries that includes both Spanish deserters and native collaborators who have forsaken their own for power and profit. The dynamic between Jaguar Paw and Mateo becomes one of the film's emotional anchors, an evolving relationship built on suspicion, anger, understanding, and ultimately mutual respect. Their shared journey through a landscape ravaged by fire and betrayal forces both men to confront uncomfortable truths about their identities, loyalties, and the possibility of redemption. While the first film was praised for its authenticity, including dialogue spoken in Yucatec Maya and painstaking attention to historical detail, the sequel doubles down on this approach. The languages spoken include multiple Mayan dialects, Nahuatl, and early forms of Spanish, with linguistic experts brought in to ensure accuracy and cultural nuance. The production returns to real locations in Mexico and Central America, often filming in dense jungle regions and ancient ruins far from modern civilization. The physical demands on the cast are once again extreme, with most scenes requiring barefoot traversals across dangerous terrain, hand-to-hand combat, and elaborate ceremonial rituals. The costume and makeup departments have once again created historically grounded wardrobes, from the body paint and jewelry of indigenous warriors to the chainmail and helmets of the Spanish soldiers. Yet the visuals serve not merely to impress, but to immerse the viewer into a world on the edge of collapse, where beauty and brutality coexist in every frame. One of the most harrowing aspects of Apocalypto 2 is its unflinching portrayal of cultural destruction. As Spanish influence spreads, traditional ways of life begin to vanish. Sacred temples are desecrated, codices are burned, and entire communities are either wiped out or forcibly assimilated. Jaguar Paw, once a protector of his people, finds himself powerless to stop the slow erosion of everything he holds dear. The sequel does not paint the Spaniards as one-dimensional villains, but rather presents a complex view of colonization, where greed, fear, faith, and curiosity all play a role. For some indigenous groups, conversion and cooperation seem the only way to survive. For others, violent resistance becomes the path of honor, even if it means certain death. Through this chaos, Apocalypto 2 raises questions that resonate far beyond its historical setting. What happens when a culture dies? Can identity survive displacement? Is revenge ever just? And can forgiveness ever be enough? The emotional stakes of the film are amplified by the personal trials faced by Jaguar Paw's family. His wife Seven and their children, once sheltered in the forest, are now older and more involved in the world's dangers. His oldest son, Tikal, named after the great city, has grown into a fierce but idealistic young man who believes in resisting the invaders at all costs, even if it means war. This generational conflict adds a layer of tension to Jaguar Paw's internal struggle. Having witnessed the futility and horror of violence, he fears that his son may be seduced by the same cycle of hatred that consumed their enemies. Yet he also understands Tikal's pain and pride, and the fire that burns in his heart. The dynamic between father and son becomes a mirror for the broader theme of legacy. What do we pass on, and what should be left behind? Tikal's rebellion leads to consequences that ripple across tribes and factions, culminating in a heartbreaking confrontation that forces Jaguar Paw to choose between loyalty to blood and duty to peace. Spirituality remains a major theme in the sequel, as the characters grapple with the collapse of their cosmology and the rise of new gods. Jaguar Paw, once a man of tradition, begins to question the gods he once believed in. Dreams and visions torment him. Some appear to be prophecies, others memories twisted into nightmares. The film blurs the line between spiritual and psychological experiences, using surreal imagery and symbolic motifs to represent the inner turmoil of its characters. The sacred jaguar that once represented power and guidance now appears as a shadow, elusive and silent. Priests who once led their people with wisdom are either dead, corrupted, or silenced. In their place rise missionaries, who offer salvation in a foreign tongue and foreign symbols. Some characters embrace this new faith, while others see it as a final betrayal. The clash of belief systems is not just ideological, but deeply personal, with rituals, dreams, and prayers playing a role in the characters' most critical decisions. Violence. In Apocalypto 2 is as raw and visceral as in the original, but it is also more deliberate, more weighted with meaning. Each act of bloodshed is not just survival or spectacle, but part of a larger tragedy. Battles are chaotic, personal, and messy. The camera lingers not only on the act of killing, but on its consequences: the silence after a scream, the gaze of a child watching their parent fall, the emptiness of a temple now soaked in blood. There are no winners in this war, only survivors, with haunted eyes. The choreography of the action scenes combines traditional indigenous combat techniques with the more organized but brutal tactics of Spanish warfare. Spears meet muskets, obsidian blades meet steel swords, and armor proves both a shield and a weakness. The fight scenes are filmed with a mix of handheld urgency and wide, sweeping shots that show the scale and desperation of the conflict. The score, composed once again with traditional instruments and tribal rhythms, underscores the tension without overpowering the emotion. The landscape itself becomes a character in the sequel. Lush jungles, scorched villages, mist-covered mountains, and coastal cliffs provide both refuge and threat. Nature is depicted not as a passive backdrop, but as a force that responds to the chaos of man. Animals behave strangely, the weather turns violent, and the earth seems to mourn the loss of balance. There are scenes where silence reigns, no dialogue, no music, only the sound of wind and water and distant cries. These moments provide rare peace in a film otherwise defined by struggle, and they allow the viewer to reflect alongside the characters. The cinematography takes full advantage of natural light and real settings, capturing both the grandeur and the decay of a world in transition. Fire becomes a recurring motif, symbolizing destruction, cleansing, passion, and death. From burning temples to funeral pyres, the imagery of flame haunts the narrative like a recurring nightmare. As the film approaches its climax, multiple storylines converge in a final confrontation that is as much spiritual as it is physical. Jaguar Paw must confront not just the enemies before him, but the rage within him. Mateo must choose between loyalty to his heritage and allegiance to his conscience. Tikal must learn the cost of defiance. The battle that ensues is not epic in size but devastating in impact. A village is destroyed, a sacred site is defiled, and the lines between hero and villain blur until only shades of gray remain. In the aftermath, characters are left not with triumph, but with silence.